Good morning and welcome back. You're watching World News and I'm your host, Klaudia Czerwińska. The EU is pressing Ukraine to reverse its anti-corruption overhaul as protests sweep the country. Poland's incoming deputy prime minister warns that Kyiv's EU bid is at risk. Russia and Ukraine exchange over 2,000 prisoners in Istanbul, but civilians remain behind. Let's begin. Ukraine suffered another round of deadly mass airstrikes by Russian forces overnight Wednesday. Civilian infrastructure in the port city of Odesa was particularly damaged in the latest barrage. We're going live to our correspondent in Kyiv, Oz Kateji. Good morning, Oz. So the blaze was reported at the Odessa's Privoz market, a UNESCO heritage site. What do we know so far, and what could be the potential extent of the damage?
Good morning, Claudia. Well, it's still early to be able to assess the damage. As you said, this is a UNESCO heritage site, a protected site, the Privoz food market, the largest food market in Odessa, historic food market. So we will have to wait to see the extent of the total damage done there. Overnight, 4 people killed, 3 of them in Donetsk, 28 civilians injured, with the Ukrainian authorities saying Russia launched 103 drones and 4 missiles onto Ukrainian territory. Now, it wasn't just Odessa in the south of Ukraine that was hit. Cherkasy, Kharkiv, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, Sumy, and Mykolaiv were all among cities and regions that had been targeted in these overnight Russian attacks. And these attacks came following the third round of negotiations in Istanbul. And there was a prisoner swap late last night between Russia and Ukraine. As you said, 2,000 prisoners exchanged there. So that is the 9th round of prisoner swaps we've had since these negotiations between Russia and Ukraine began in Turkey. However, no real sign of any breakthrough with regards to those negotiations. A statement released by President Zelensky this morning acknowledging the attacks on Odessa says Russia does not stop its terror, blocks diplomacy, and that's why it deserves full-scale sanctions responses and our strikes on its logistics, military bases, and military production facilities. We will do everything to make diplomacy work, but it's Russia that must end the war that it started. So very clear position from the Ukrainians that the Russians are still blocking diplomacy even after this third round of talks. And the message that Moscow is sending here following that round of talks with attacks like this is very clear to the Ukrainians, at least. They believe that Russia is not interested in peace. Back to you, Claudia.
Thank you so much, Oz, for filling us in on the details. This was Oz Kateji reporting live from Kyiv. The U.S. has approved 2 potential arms sales to Ukraine, totaling over $300 million as President Donald Trump's approach to the war evolves. The new packages aims to bolster Ukraine's defensive capabilities amid intensifying Russian attacks. The deal includes the possible provision of medium-range surface-to-air missile systems to bolster Ukraine's air defenses, as well as infantry fighting vehicles to help Kyiv maintain combat readiness. The move comes as Donald Trump, once openly critical of military aid to Ukraine, recalibrates his approach to the war. As the conflict drags on, with Russia maintaining unrelenting drone and missile attacks and repeatedly rejecting Trump's ceasefire proposals, the U.S. president appears to have significantly shifted his position on both Ukraine and Putin. The European Union is calling on Ukraine to roll back its crackdown on the country's anti-corruption bureaus after Kyiv passed a new bill effectively ending their independence. In response to the move, Ukrainians have taken to the streets in the latest protest since the Russians' full-scale invasion began. President Volodymyr Zelensky appears to be trying to calm the waters, promising to restore the office's independence, but has yet to provide further details. John Todd has more on this developing story.
Concern in Kyiv sparks Ukraine's largest wartime protests. They're in response to a new law that brings 2 key independent anti-corruption agencies under state control. In an exclusive interview with TVP World, the European Commissioner for Enlargement, Marta Koss, called on President Zelensky to reverse the law.
The message to the president and to the government is that I'm concerned because fighting corruption is one of the basics on the way to become an EU member. And it is a precondition that the state is having independent anti-corruption agencies. In this respect, I expect that we will go back to the independent agencies.
Poland's Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski, who hosted KOS in Warsaw, was even more explicit.
The fastest way for Ukraine to lose the support both of the EU and the member states and the publics in member states is to go back to the bad old days of corruption. As a corrupt country, Ukraine will not make it into the EU.
The law grants the presidentially appointed Prosecutor General expanded authority over the National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine and the Specialized Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office. It followed arrests on Monday of 2 alleged Russian moles. The demonstrations are countrywide. Critics have accused Zelensky of a power grab that would delight Russia's leadership.
Instability in Ukraine and rolling back reforms, rule of law and anti-corruption reforms, all that plays well for Russian narratives. And Kremlin is absolutely happy. I think they are, applauding what is happening.
European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has conveyed her strong concern to Zelensky about the anti-corruption restrictions. According to officials, von der Leyen demanded an explanation from Kyiv. Zelensky met with the anti-corruption chiefs on Wednesday and later in the day attempted to address concerns.
I will propose to Parliament a bill that will be a response, which will ensure strength in the law enforcement system. There will be no Russian influence or interference in the activities of law enforcement agencies and, very importantly, all provisions for the independence of anti-corruption institutions will be included.
Marta Kos also had a message for those who've taken to the streets in Ukraine.
For the citizens of Ukraine, I would say I am your biggest supporter and I will stay your biggest supporter. And helping Ukraine becoming a member of the EU is the most important task I have as a commissioner for enlargement.
John Todd for TVP World.
Zelensky probably decided he is the Messiah, said Ukrainian MP Alexi Gonchareno when commenting for TVP World on the recent developments in Ukrainian politics. Here's more from the interview.
There are autocratic tendencies in Ukraine already for many months. And Zelensky was becoming more and more autocratic, not yesterday, but it was happening month after month. We were not speaking about this loudly because we didn't want to hurt the country in any way, because definitely the largest challenge, the biggest challenge for Ukraine is Russian aggression. But the way how Zelensky, he probably decided that he's Messiah. I don't know. Power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And unfortunately, he lost understanding that this Ukrainian resilience is resilience of Ukrainian people, not just by him personally. And all this hype around him personally made him believe that he's, I don't know, like very, very special. And that is a problem. And he was increasing his control over media, over local authorities. All opposition is under hard pressure. Constitutional court doesn't work in Ukraine. Almost all law enforcement bodies were under complete control and martial law time. And the only one which was not under complete control was anti-corruptional bodies.
And as we only recently learned, there were no survivors of the passenger plane crash in Russia's eastern region of Amur, according to the TASS news agency. 45 people were on board of the aircraft. The still-burning wreckage of the Angara Airlines AN-24 plane was found in the region of Amur on Thursday after it previously disappeared from flight radars. The flight dropped off radar while approaching its destination of Tinda, a town near the Russia-China border. Regional Governor Vasily Orlov said that according to preliminary data, there were 43 passengers, including 5 children and 6 crew members on board. A Norwegian security guard at the U.S. Embassy in Oslo has been charged with spying for Russia and Iran. The man allegedly passed embassy floor plans, staff details and security procedures to Russian and Iranian intelligence officers. The meetings between the alleged spy and operatives from Iran and Russia took place in Norway, Serbia and Turkey. The Norwegian reportedly received 10,000 euros from Russia and nearly 100,000 euros in Bitcoin from Iran, which he then concealed using his family's bank accounts. According to Norwegian police, the leaks pose an elevated risk to embassy staff and U.S. security interests. The alleged spy will stand trial and, if convicted, could face up to 20 years in prison. Europe is already at war with Russia, and it's a new generation of warfare that includes the weaponization of migration. That's the assessment of Ivana Stradner, a research fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, who was a recent guest on TVP World Talks.
Europe is already at a war with Russia. Russia doesn't need to send tanks and jets to any of the Western capitals, including in Poland, because Russia is waging something that is called a new generation of warfare. So Russia is weaponizing, in addition to disinformation, in addition to the church, in addition to all other things, but also migration. And we have to call a spade, because that's a silent war. It's a war that a lot of people who are not in this field cannot see. So I have to tell you, when I was reading the news earlier today, I was absolutely not surprised, because the Polish authorities have been warning that between 50 and 200 migrants are trying to cross the border. And the question is why? Because look, you do not have to have a PhD in geography to understand that all those migrants are coming through a quite odd route, like from the Middle East and Africa through Belarus and Poland. I'm sorry, but that's not really how geography works. So we already know that that's the part of Russia's hybrid warfare playbook.
European Council President Antonio Costa called on China to use its influence on Russia to bring an end to the war in Ukraine. Speaking to Chinese President Xi Jinping, European officials said that EU-China relations have reached an inflection point and must be rebalanced.
As a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, we call on China to use its influence on Russia to respect the United Nations Charter and to bring an end to its war on aggression against Ukraine.
We have reached an inflection point. Rebalancing our bilateral relation is essential, because to be sustainable, the relations need to be mutually beneficial. And to achieve this, it is vital for China and Europe to acknowledge our respective concerns and come forward with real solutions.
The more complex and challenging the international situation becomes, the more China and Europe need to strengthen communication, enhance mutual trust and deepen cooperation, so as to contribute greater stability and certainty to the world through a steady and healthy China-Europe relationship.
The new government of Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk will be sworn in later on Thursday. The event will take place in the presidential palace as, according to the Polish constitution, it is the president's prerogative to swear in the ministerial cabinets. Outgoing Polish President Andrzej Duda will receive the new government in the early afternoon. The government reshuffle sees, among others, Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski assuming the additional role of Deputy Prime Minister. One of the biggest changes concerns the Justice Ministry. Judge Waldemar Żurek will replace Adam Bodnar as Justice Minister. The reshuffle comes after the ruling Central Liberal Coalition lost the presidential election in June to the conservative opposition candidate Karol Nawrocki. With just 2 years left until the next parliamentary election, Prime Minister Tusk is looking to regroup and regain momentum. And so this would be all the latest news for now. Thank you so much for joining. I'm Klaudia Czerwińska, and I hope to see you back here on TVP World for more news, features, and interviews. See you there.